Welcome to Dark Night. I'm here to guide you through the shadows tonight, sharing stories that dance on the edge of sleep and dreams. You found your way to this quiet corner of the internet where the rain falls gently outside your window, and the black screen keeps your mind calm and peaceful. Tonight, I'll weave three tales from the darker side of human experience. Stories that whisper rather than shout, that chill rather than terrify. Let the soft patter of rain wash over you as these words carry you toward rest. Before we begin this journey together, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Dark Night for more nocturnal wanderings. Your support helps keep these midnight stories alive. Now, find your most comfortable position. Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow and deepen. The black screen will hold no distractions. Only darkness to cradle your thoughts as we explore the mysteries that wait in the spaces between waking and sleeping. Allow the rain to be your lullaby, and let these stories be your gateway to dreams. Story 1. The Night Shift Watcher. This happened 3 years ago when I was working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of a small town in Montana. The station sat alone on a stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever, with nothing but empty fields and distant mountains surrounding it. During the day, it was just another stop for travelers, but at night it felt like the edge of the world. I'd been working there for about 6 months, and I thought I'd gotten used to the isolation. The quiet hum of the refrigerators, the occasional trucker stopping for coffee and cigarettes, the way headlights would appear like distant stars before sweeping past into the darkness. But there was something about that particular October that felt different, wrong. It started with small things. Items on the shelves would be moved slightly when I came back from restocking the coolers. At first, I blamed it on customers I might not have noticed, but then it began happening during the dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m., when no one had been in the store for hours. A bag of chips moved from the third shelf to the second. A magazine turned backward. Small things that could be explained away if you wanted to explain them away. But then came the night I saw him for the first time. It was around 3:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of night where the silence feels thick enough to cut with a knife. I was behind the counter reading a paperback novel to stay awake when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Through the large front windows, I could see someone standing at the edge of the parking lot, just where the overhead lights faded into darkness. He was perfectly still, facing the store. Even from that distance, I could tell he was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat or jacket. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. He wasn't moving at all, not shifting his weight, not looking around, not doing any of the small unconscious movements people make when they're just standing somewhere. He was as motionless as a statue. I watched him for what felt like 10 minutes, though it was probably only 2 or 3. Finally, I decided to step outside and see what he wanted. Maybe his car had broken down, or maybe he needed directions. But when I walked to the door and looked out again, he was gone. The parking lot was completely empty. The next night, he was back. Same spot, same perfect stillness. This time I tried calling out from the doorway, asking if he needed help, but there was no response. He just stood there, a dark silhouette against the even darker night. When I blinked, he vanished again. This went on for a week. Every night around 3:30, he would appear at the edge of the parking lot and stand there for a few minutes before disappearing. I started to dread that time, checking the clock obsessively as it approached, my hands growing sweaty and my heart rate picking up. I told my manager about it, but he just shrugged and said it was probably some homeless guy or maybe someone with mental health issues. He suggested I call the cops if it made me uncomfortable, but something about the figure didn't seem substantial enough to warrant calling the police. What would I tell them? That someone was standing in a public parking lot? That they weren't breaking any laws, just making me nervous? I decided to handle it myself. On the 8th night, I prepared. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from behind the counter and positioned myself near the front door. When 3:30 rolled around, sure enough, the figure appeared in his usual spot. This time, instead of just watching, I immediately walked outside, flashlight in hand. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended in the vast emptiness. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond, but for the first time I noticed something that made my blood run cold. As I got closer, I could see that his feet weren't quite touching the ground. He was hovering maybe an inch above the asphalt, completely motionless, like he was suspended by invisible wires. I stopped walking, my flashlight beam trained on the spot where he stood, but the light seemed to pass right through him. He was there, clearly visible as a dark outline, but somehow the light couldn't catch him. It was like trying to illuminate a shadow with more shadow. That's when he turned toward me. I say turned, but that's not quite right. He didn't move his body or shift his stance. One moment he was facing the store, and the next moment he was facing me as if someone had simply rotated a photograph. And I could feel his gaze on me, even though I couldn't make out any features under what might have been a hood. We stood there like that for what felt like an eternity. Him hovering and motionless about 30 feet away. Me rooted to the spot with my useless flashlight shaking in my hand. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then he began to move toward me. Not walking. Not floating exactly. He glided across the pavement without any visible means of locomotion, his dark form growing larger as he approached. There was something deeply wrong about the way he moved, like he was traveling through a different kind of space than the rest of us, governed by different rules. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up completely. All I could do was stand there and watch as this impossible thing drew closer and closer. When he was about 10 feet away, I could finally make out some details. His coat wasn't a coat at all. It seemed to be made of the same darkness that surrounded us, flowing and shifting like liquid shadow. Where his face should have been was just more darkness, deeper and more absolute than the night around us. But his eyes were points of cold, pale light, like distant stars, and they were fixed directly on mine. Looking into them felt like staring into the void between galaxies, vast and empty and indifferent to human existence. He stopped just out of arm's reach, and for a long moment, we simply regarded each other. Then, without warning, he spoke. Not with a voice exactly, but the words formed in my mind as clearly as if someone had whispered them directly into my ear. "You see me," he said, and the words carried with them a weight of surprise and something else. "Hunger. What do you want?" I managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure if I said it aloud or just thought it. "To be seen," came the reply, flooding my consciousness with a cold that seemed to start in my bones and spread outward. It has been so long since anyone could see me. "What are you?" But instead of answering, he began to change. The darkness that made up his form started to shift and writhe, revealing glimpses of something underneath. Pale skin stretched too tight, clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in decades, and underneath it all, the suggestion of something that had once been human but had been worn away by time and loneliness until only the most essential parts remained. "I watched this place," he continued, his mental voice growing stronger, more present in my head. "Watched the lights. Watched the people come and go. Watched life continue without me, but no one saw me watching. No one knew I was here. I realized then that he wasn't threatening me. He was lonely, desperately, unbearably lonely. Whatever he was, however long he'd been, existing in this state, he had been invisible to everyone who passed this place. Until me. "How long have you been here?" I asked, finding my voice again. The answer came not in words, but in images that flooded my mind. A car accident on this stretch of highway decades ago. A young man was thrown from his vehicle, dying alone in the darkness while traffic passed by without stopping. Years of his spirit being pulled to this spot, trying to flag down help that would never come, trying to be seen by people who couldn't see him, until something changed, until the loneliness and desperation had transformed him into something else. Something that could be seen but only by certain people under certain conditions, and only late at night when the veil between worlds grew thin. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry no one stopped to help you." The pale lights that were his eyes seemed to flicker, and for a moment, his form became more solid, more human. I could see the face of a young man, maybe in his 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle expression. But then the darkness flowed back over him, obscuring his features once again. "You see me," he repeated, and this time there was something like gratitude in the mental voice. "After so long someone sees me. What happens now?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time, and I could feel him considering the question. Finally he said, "Now I know I exist. Now I know I'm still here. That changes things. Will you keep coming back?" "Would you want me to?" The question caught me off guard. Was I afraid of him? Yes, absolutely. But was I afraid he would hurt me? Strangely, no. Despite his otherworldly appearance and the unnatural way he moved, I didn't sense any malevolence from him. Just sadness and loneliness and a desperate need to be acknowledged. I don't know, I said honestly. "Then I will choose," he replied. "I have been alone long enough. Perhaps it is time to let go." With that, he began to fade, not quickly, but gradually, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. As he grew more transparent, I could see something else in his expression. Relief. "Thank you," his voice whispered in my mind, growing fainter with each word. "For seeing me, for knowing I was here, for caring that I was alone." And then he was gone. I stood in the parking lot for another 10 minutes waiting to see if he would reappear, but the night remained empty. Eventually I went back inside, my hands still shaking, my mind reeling from what I had experienced. He never came back. Not the next night or the night after that or any night since. Sometimes when I'm working late shifts at my new job, I quit the gas station a month later. I wonder if I really helped him find peace, or if he simply moved on to haunt someone else. But I don't think so. There was something final about that last conversation, something that felt like closure. The gas station closed down about a year later. The company said it wasn't profitable enough to keep running, but I sometimes wonder if there were other reasons. If other night shift workers had their own encounters and decided they couldn't handle it anymore. I drive past the old location sometimes when I'm heading out of town. The building is still there, empty and dark with weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. But sometimes, just for a second, I think I see a flicker of movement near where the front doors used to be, and I wonder if he's still there after all, waiting for the next person who might be able to see him. Or maybe it's just my imagination. Maybe the whole thing was just stress and sleep deprivation and too many late nights in isolation. But on the quiet nights when I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember the weight of his gratitude when I acknowledged his existence. And I think about how many lost souls might be out there, invisible and forgotten, just waiting for someone to see them. I've never told anyone this story before. People would think I was crazy or making it up for attention. But sometimes, late at night when the world feels thin and strange, I remember that lonely figure standing at the edge of the light. And I wonder, how many others are out there watching and waiting to be seen? If you're listening now, where are you from? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know who's sharing this darkness with me tonight. Now, let's slip into our next tale. Story 2. The basement tenant. When I inherited my grandmother's house in Salem, Oregon, I thought I'd finally caught a break. At 26, I'd been bouncing between cramped apartments and sketchy roommates for years, barely scraping together rent money each month. The house was old, built in 1923, but it was mine, free and clear, and it represented a fresh start I desperately needed. The Victorian-style home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns on the sidewalk. It was the kind of neighborhood where people still knew each other's names and children rode bicycles without helmets. Picture perfect, really, except for one small detail that the estate lawyer mentioned almost as an afterthought. "There's a tenant in the basement apartment," he said, shuffling through papers in his cramped office. "Your grandmother had a verbal agreement with him. He's been there for, must be 15 years now. Very quiet. Pays his rent in cash every month. Never been a problem." I asked about the lease, but apparently my grandmother had never bothered with formal paperwork. Old school handshake deals, the lawyer explained. The tenant paid $200 a month. Ridiculously low even for a basement apartment. But money was money, and I needed every penny I could get. "What's his name?" I asked. The lawyer frowned and flipped through more documents. "You know, I'm not seeing it written down anywhere. Your grandmother just referred to him as the gentleman downstairs. But like I said, never been any trouble. Quiet as a mouse." I moved in on a gray October morning, my few possessions fitting easily into the back of a borrowed pickup truck. The main house was beautifully preserved, with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and built-in cabinets that spoke of craftsmanship from a different era. My grandmother had taken excellent care of the place, and everything was clean and well-maintained. The basement entrance was around the back of the house, a separate door that led to what had apparently been converted into a small apartment decades ago. I made a mental note to introduce myself to my tenants soon, but first I wanted to get settled in my own space. It took me 3 days to unpack and arrange my furniture, and during that time I occasionally heard sounds from below. Soft footsteps moving back and forth, the muffled sound of running water, the faint hum of what might have been a television or radio. Normal apartment sounds, nothing concerning. On Thursday evening, I finally worked up the courage to go downstairs and introduce myself. I'd been putting it off out of social anxiety more than anything else. I'd never been a landlord before, and I wasn't sure what the proper protocol was. Should I be formal and businesslike, friendly and neighborly? I decided to aim for somewhere in the middle. The back steps were wooden and creaked under my weight. The basement door was painted dark green and had a small frosted glass window near the top. I knocked gently, 3 soft raps, and waited. No answer. I knocked again a little louder this time and called out, "Hello? I'm Sarah. I inherited the house from my grandmother. I just wanted to introduce myself." Still nothing. But I could hear movement inside, the sound of footsteps and what might have been furniture being moved around. Someone was definitely home. I tried one more time, knocking louder and speaking up. "I'm not here about rent or anything like that. I just wanted to meet you and let you know I'm the new owner." The sounds inside stopped completely. It was like someone had suddenly frozen in place, holding their breath and waiting for me to leave. After a few more minutes of silence, I gave up and went back upstairs. Over the next few weeks, I tried several more times to make contact with my mysterious tenant. I left a friendly note taped to his door, introducing myself and including my phone number. The note disappeared, but I never received a call. I tried knocking at different times, morning, afternoon, evening, but never got a response, even though I could always hear signs of life from within. The rent appeared like clockwork, though. Every first of the month, I would find exactly $200 in cash slipped under my kitchen door sometime during the night. Always in 20s, always pristine bills, never a note or receipt. Just the money, as if it had materialized out of thin air. I began to develop a routine around my invisible tenant. I could predict his movements based on the sounds that traveled up through the floorboards. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., I would hear the shower running for precisely 15 minutes. At 8 a.m., footsteps would cross the basement, followed by the sound of the back door opening and closing. Then silence until around 6 p.m. when the same pattern would reverse. Door, footsteps, and eventually the soft murmur of what I assumed was a television. On weekends, the schedule changed slightly. He would stay in longer in the mornings, and I would hear what sounded like furniture being rearranged, or maybe exercise equipment being used. But still, never a glimpse of the man himself. I started asking the neighbors about him, casually bringing him up in conversation when I met people while walking to check the mail or working in the front yard. The responses I got were odd. Mrs. Patterson from next door, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, got a strange look on her face when I mentioned the basement tenant. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You mean the quiet one? Yes, he's been there for as long as I can remember. Very private. I think I saw him once years ago, but..." She trailed off and changed the subject abruptly. The mailman, a friendly guy named Dave who'd been delivering to the street for over a decade, had a similar reaction. "I've never actually seen him," Dave admitted, "but your grandmother used to mention him sometimes. Said he was a lovely man, just very shy. She seemed quite fond of him, actually." "Did she ever mention his name?" Dave shook his head. "Just called him her gentleman friend. I always got the impression she was a little protective of his privacy. The more I learned, the more curious I became. Who was this person living beneath my feet? Why was he so secretive? And why did everyone who knew about him seem uncomfortable discussing him? My curiosity reached a breaking point in December. I'd been living in the house for 3 months, and I'd never so much as glimpsed my tenant. The weather had turned cold and wet, typical Pacific Northwest winter, and I found myself spending more time indoors, which meant I was more aware of the sounds from below. That's when I started noticing something strange. The footsteps I'd been hearing, they didn't sound quite right. They were too light, almost weightless, and they had an odd rhythm to them. Not the normal heel-toe pattern of someone walking, but more like gliding. Like someone moving without fully lifting their feet off the ground. And the timing was too perfect. Every single day, the same routine down to the minute. No variation for weather or sickness or any of the small changes that make us human. It was mechanical, almost programmed. One evening, I decided to do a little detective work. I waited until I heard the usual 6 p.m. return, then quickly grabbed a flashlight and went outside to the back of the house. If I could just get a glimpse through that frosted window, maybe I could finally see who I was dealing with. I crept around to the basement door as quietly as possible and carefully approached the window. The glass was old and warped, making it difficult to see through clearly, but there was definitely light on inside. I could make out shapes moving around, furniture, maybe a bookshelf, what looked like a small kitchenette in one corner, but I couldn't see the tenant himself. I pressed closer to the glass, straining to make out more details when suddenly the light inside went out, not like someone had flipped a switch, but instantly, as if it had been snuffed out like a candle. The basement went completely dark and I couldn't see anything at all. Then I heard breathing, not from inside the apartment, but right behind me. Slow, steady breaths that seemed to be coming from just over my shoulder. The hair on my arm stood up and I spun around quickly, shining my flashlight into the darkness behind me. Nothing. The backyard was empty, just bare trees and the neighbor's fence. But I could still hear the breathing, and now it seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. I ran back to the house and locked the door behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. From inside, I could hear the basement light click back on, and the familiar sounds of movement resumed as if nothing had happened. After that incident, I became more cautious, but also more determined to solve the mystery. I started keeping a journal of all the sounds I heard from below, looking for patterns or anything unusual. I researched the history of the house online, checking old property records and newspaper archives. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1957, there had been a fire in the basement of my house. A man named Thomas Hartwell, described as a reclusive tenant who had been living there for several years, had died in the blaze. According to the newspaper report, his body was so badly burned that identification was only possible through dental records. The fire had been contained to the basement apartment, and after repairs, my grandmother had moved in upstairs. That was 67 years ago. But according to the neighbors, the basement tenant had been there for 15 years. The math didn't add up unless the same tenant had been there all along. I found a photograph of Thomas Hartwell in the newspaper archive. It was a grainy black and white image, but I could make out a thin, middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The caption identified him as a local librarian who had kept to himself and was well regarded by those who knew him. He looked exactly like the kind of person neighbors would describe as a quiet gentleman. Armed with this information, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to force a meeting, I would reach out to him in a way that acknowledged what he might be. It sounds crazy now, but at the time it felt like the only logical explanation. That evening, I wrote a letter and slipped it under his door. Dear Thomas, I know who you are, and I want you to know that you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. My grandmother clearly cared about you, and I respect that. You don't have to hide from me or avoid me. I'm not afraid, and I'm not going to try to make you leave. If you'd like to talk, I'll be in the kitchen tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. If you'd rather maintain your privacy, that's fine too. But please know that you have a friend upstairs if you ever need one. Sarah. I slid the letter under his door and went to bed, not sure what to expect. The next evening, I sat in the kitchen at exactly 8 p.m. drinking tea and trying to look casual. At 8:15, I heard the basement door open and close, followed by the soft sound of footsteps on the back stairs. Someone was coming up to the main house. The footsteps stopped at my back door, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then came a gentle knock. 3 soft taps, just like I had used when I first tried to introduce myself. I opened the door, and there he was. Thomas Hartwell looked exactly like his photograph, except he was translucent. I could see through him to the backyard beyond. But he was definitely there. A kind-faced man in old-fashioned clothes, holding my letter in hands that flickered like candlelight. Thank you, he said, and his voice was soft and hollow, like it was coming from far away. It's been so long since anyone knew I was here. How long have you really been in the basement? I asked. Since the fire, he admitted. I died that night, but somehow I never left. Your grandmother found me a few weeks later wandering through the house, confused and lost. She helped me understand what had happened, and she let me stay in the rebuilt basement. She said everyone deserves a home, living or dead. She never told anyone? Thomas smiled sadly. She was protecting me. She knew that if people found out, they would want to investigate, bring in researchers or ghost hunters or try to make me move on. But I wasn't ready to go. I liked it here. It was peaceful. And the rent? I found ways to earn money, he said cryptically. There are advantages to being invisible sometimes. I could help people with things they needed done without them knowing how it happened. Good deeds, small miracles. People would leave money in gratitude, never knowing who to thank. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night. Thomas told me about his life before the fire, his love of books and quiet spaces, his contentment with solitude. He spoke about my grandmother with deep affection, describing their unusual friendship and the comfort they had found in each other's company. She was the first person who wasn't afraid of me, he said. She treated me like I was still human, still worthy of kindness and respect. You are, I told him, and I meant it. From that night forward, Thomas and I developed our own friendship. He would visit me in the kitchen once or twice a week, always polite, always grateful, never staying too long. He told me stories about the neighborhood's history, about the families who had lived and died on our street over the decades. He was like a living library of local memories. In return, I brought him books from the public library, leaving them outside his door. We devoured them hungrily, reading everything from classic literature to modern science fiction. We would discuss them during our evening chats, and I came to realize that Thomas had one of the sharpest, most curious minds I'd ever encountered. Don't you want to move on? I asked him one evening, to whatever comes next. Thomas was quiet for a long time before answering. Sometimes, he admitted. But I'm afraid, what if there's nothing? What if this is all there is for people like me? At least here I exist. I have purpose. I have a friend. You'll always have a friend, I promised him, whether you're here or somewhere else. He smiled at that, and for a moment he seemed almost solid, almost alive again. Because, my dear, it was an important day for you. A moment of joy and accomplishment that deserved to be preserved. I collect such moments, but how do you have this picture? How are you? I'm in all of them, she said simply. Every photograph in this house contains a piece of me, just as they contain pieces of the people they show. That's how memory works, Jessica. We become part of the moments we witness, whether we're visible or not. I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. I don't understand. Mrs. Blackwood sat down in a nearby chair, suddenly looking every one of her apparent 80-plus years. 53 years ago, I was involved in a terrible accident. A fire at a photography studio where I worked as an assistant. Several people died that night, including myself. But something about being surrounded by all those photographs, all those captured moments of human happiness, kept part of me tied to this world. You're saying you're dead? Yes, I suppose I am, but also not. I exist in the spaces between moments, in the pause between the camera's click and the image's development. I've become a curator of human joy, collecting and preserving the happiest moments from people's lives. She gestured around the room at the thousands of photographs. Every one of these represents a time when someone was truly, completely happy. Weddings, graduations, birthdays, family reunions, moments when love and joy were so pure that they left an imprint on the world itself. I find these moments and preserve them. But how? Time isn't as linear as you think, she explained. Happiness creates ripples that move both forward and backward. When someone experiences true joy, it echoes through their entire life, touching moments in their past and future. I follow those echoes and I collect the images they create. I looked around the room with new eyes, understanding finally dawning. These aren't just random photographs. They're all moments of perfect happiness. Exactly. And by preserving them here, I ensure they're never truly lost. Even after the people in them die, even after their families forget, these moments of pure joy continue to exist. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Blackwood smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely at peace. Because it's time for me to add my own moment to the collection. This conversation right now, it's the happiest I've been since the fire. Finally being able to share my purpose with someone who understands it's what I've been waiting for. As she spoke, I noticed she was becoming more transparent, her edges growing soft and unfocused. The room around us seemed to grow brighter, as if lit by a warm golden light that had no visible source. What's happening? I'm letting go, she said, her voice growing distant but somehow more clear at the same time. I've been holding on to this world through will and purpose, but now that purpose is complete. Someone knows about the collection, understands its importance. The photographs will be safe, but what will happen to them? To the house? They'll find their way to where they need to be, she said, her form now barely visible. The moments themselves are eternal. They don't need me to preserve them anymore. They never really did. I was just helping them remember themselves. Mrs. Blackwood faded completely as I watched, leaving behind only the faint scent of roses and old paper. I stood alone in the room full of photographs, surrounded by thousands of moments of human happiness, feeling both profound sadness and strange peace. I never saw her again, but the photographs remained. When I went back the next week, the house was empty, not abandoned, but peacefully vacant, as if waiting for something. The photographs were all still there, perfectly arranged, but they seemed different somehow. Less like a collection and more like windows, each one glowing softly with its own internal light, radiating the joy and love captured within. I learned later that the house had been sold to a museum foundation, which planned to preserve it as a gallery of human joy. The photographs would be studied, cataloged, and eventually displayed for the public, allowing visitors to experience these moments of perfect happiness secondhand. But sometimes, when I'm having a particularly difficult day, I drive by the old Blackwood house. Through the windows, I can still see the soft golden glow emanating from the photographs inside. And occasionally, just for a moment, I think I see a figure moving among them. A small, elegant woman in a cashmere sweater, still tending to her collection of happiness, still ensuring that the most precious moments of human experience are never truly lost. I keep my own collection of photographs now, carefully arranged and regularly cleaned. Not because I think they need supernatural preservation, but because Mrs. Blackwood taught me something important about the nature of joy. Every moment of genuine happiness we experience creates ripples through time, touching the past and future in ways we can't imagine. By preserving these moments in photographs and memories, in stories, we participate in something larger than ourselves. We become keepers of the light that makes life worth living, guardians of the joy that connects all human experience across time and space. And sometimes, late at night when I'm looking through my photo albums, I swear I can feel her presence beside me, smiling as she watches me tend to my own small collection of preserved happiness. Some purposes I've learned transcend death itself, and some guardianships are passed down not through blood or law, but through understanding and love. The memory keepers are everywhere, preserving the moments that matter most, ensuring that no joy is ever truly forgotten. We just don't usually notice them until we're ready to become one ourselves. And so we reach the end of tonight's journey through the shadows, 3 tales of encounters that exist in the quiet places where our world touches something else entirely. The night shift watcher who longed to be seen, the gentle spirit who found friendship beyond death, and the keeper of memories who preserved joy across the boundaries of time itself. These stories remind us that darkness doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it simply means mystery. Sometimes the things that make us pause and wonder are not threats, but invitations to see the world through different eyes. If you have your own story from the darker corners of experience, a tale of the unexplained, the unsettling, or the simply strange, I invite you to share it with Dark Night. Send your stories, and perhaps your voice will join this collection of midnight whispers. Make sure you're subscribed to Dark Night, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into the unknown. Each video is crafted to carry you gently towards sleep, while your mind explores the fascinating mysteries that surround us. The rain continues to fall outside. Your breathing has grown slow and steady, and the darkness behind your closed eyelids is warm and welcoming. Let these stories settle into your thoughts like sediment in still water, and allow them to carry you safely into the realm of dreams. Sleep well, fellow travelers of the night, and may your dreams be filled with wonder rather than worry. Until we meet again in the shadows, this is Dark Night, wishing you peaceful rest and gentle dreams.